Hi everyone, I'm Taylor Hudak with Activism Munich, and I am at Imperialism on Trial in London, an event to bring awareness to Julian Assange's case. I am joined by one of the speakers at the event, former British MP Chris Williamson. Chris, I want to thank you for joining me. Can you just tell me briefly why you chose to participate in this event and why Julian Assange and WikiLeaks and their publications are so vital to a democracy and free society?
Well, I thought it's absolutely essential that I was here today. I was given the opportunity to speak, and this is a crucially important event that we're holding this evening because this is a monumental, important case in relation to the issue of free speech. Julian Assange is the epitome of free speech, and we have to stand up for it, we have to speak up for it. And if the authorities are successful in extraditing Julian Assange, then that will send a very chill message throughout anybody else, throughout the kind of media, as it were, who might follow in his footsteps. If we're going to hold power to account, if we're going to hold governments and corporate power to account, we desperately need people like Julian Assange. And that's why it's so important, I think, that all of us speak out, because unfortunately the political class in this country is broken. We have two establishment political parties, and they're not speaking out in the way in which they should do, nor is the corporate media. And so it's fallen upon the independent media and ordinary citizens to speak out against the terrible abuse that Julian Assange has been subjected to right now.
So we did learn, of course, through a report through Nils Melzer, who is the UN Special Rapporteur on torture. He revealed that Assange was in fact being subjected to torture. The UK government has really failed to act appropriately in response to that report. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's very clear that the British government is acting as the US administration's poodle. It is an outrage that in Great Britain, of all countries, that we are seeing somebody who's being subjected to a show trial, somebody who is being tortured on British soil. This is an outrage. This has been done in our name. This is supposed to be a democracy, and we have to, as ordinary citizens, speak out and say we're not prepared to tolerate this. And our parliamentarians have been far too quiet about this matter. Only a handful of them have spoken out, and this is disgraceful. And that's why I think it's so important in a democracy that ordinary citizens speak out and say we're not prepared to tolerate this. We believe in a free press, we believe in freedom of speech. This is crucial to the rights of ordinary citizens, and for that reason we want to see our parliamentarians, we want to see our politicians actually standing up to the plate and making sure that they call out this abuse. And if they don't, then I'm afraid it sends a very, very negative message and will be very damaging, I think, for all of our freedoms into the future. We're seeing an abusive process in British courts. And if you look at the extradition treaty between the United States and the UK, then people are not subject to extradition if they have committed what is referred to as a political crime, as it were, or if indeed the request is politically motivated. Well, quite clearly, this is a political issue, and the request to extradite Julian Assange is politically motivated. They're in breach of their own article, and that's what's so disgraceful, that's what's so outrageous, and that's why meetings like this, I think, are really important, and why the independent media is so important, to actually bring this to the attention of the British media, because the corporate media are actually falling down on the job. And they've hardly given this internationally important issue here, this cause célèbre, this international cause célèbre, hardly any attention whatsoever. And that is a disgrace, in my opinion. And we really do need, I think, all of us to put pressure on the corporate media, to put pressure on our parliamentarians in a democracy to actually, do the right thing, end this trial and free Julian Assange.
Why do you think that the British corporate media and mainstream media is really failing to discuss this case appropriately and give it the extent of coverage that it truly deserves?
Well, the corporate media in this country are a mouthpiece for the neoliberal establishment. I mean, the press, for example, is controlled by 5 tax-exiled billionaires. And they clearly are not. And we don't have a plural corporate media in this country. And that's another issue, another problem that we do need to be highlighting. And, a lot of this needs to be, the changes that need to be rung through the country need to be brought about by a change in government, by a government that is actually prepared to speak up for and actually represent the citizens of this country. And we're being ill-served, not just by the government, but I'm afraid to say by the vast majority of parliamentarians in the House of Commons at the moment who are, to varying degrees, simply mouthpieces for the establishment. And that's completely unacceptable in a country which allegedly prides itself on democracy.
I am now joined by Fidel Narvaez, the former Ecuadorian consul who did spend time in the Ecuadorian embassy in London while Julian Assange was staying there. Now, we did learn, of course, last year that UC Global, the private Spanish security firm, was spying on Assange while he was in the embassy, meaning that his right to a fair trial has really been infringed upon because his communications with his attorneys was being spied on by his persecutors and prosecutors. You were at the embassy. Can you tell me what the conditions were like there?
Yes, for sure. If anybody thinks that Julian Assange's stay inside an embassy was comfort and an easy stay, is mistaken. It's wrong. The Ecuadorian embassy is a very small apartment. It's meant for offices. It's not meant for somebody staying full time there. And it became the most surveilled place on the planet. Surveilled by foreign intelligence services from outside, British and American. And the Ecuador had to get a security company, private security company, to guard our embassy as well. So the security company installed their own surveillance system as well inside the embassy. So it was a very difficult stay for him, not being able to get fresh air at all, not being able to get even sunlight, not being able to walk long distances, being threatened by the superpower, military and economic power full time, being defamed by corporate media, full of enemies. It was a difficult stay, of course.
Now, there has been a very effective disinformation campaign about Julian Assange, especially regarding his time at the embassy. Can you speak to the truth on this matter?
Yes, of course. The disinformation campaign came from two sources. One is the security company, which showed to be corrupt, a mercenary security company. And the second one is the new government of Ecuador, who, expelling Julian Assange from the embassy, committed a crime. So in order to distract the attention from that crime, there's a huge disinformation and defamation campaign against Julian. Julian's stay and Julian's relationship with the embassy staff, with the Ecuadorian diplomats, with the Ecuadorian official was always respectful. From him toward us, and from us toward him. Under the government of Rafael Correa, the first 5 years, we tried to make him feel welcome and protected, and he was always respectful with us and grateful for what Ecuador did for him. Things obviously changed with the new government that basically surrendered to the pressure of the United States, and from being a protector became a harasser, and obviously tried to break Julian down, isolated him, uncommunicated him. He was not allowed, in the last year, Julian Assange was not allowed to have communications, no internet, no telephone, not visitors. The new Ecuadorian government tried to break him down. It didn't succeed, and then basically hand him over to his persecutors.
And this was all essentially done at the direction of the CIA. When this story originally broke, and over the past year we've learned additional information on the nature of the relationship between UC Global, the CIA, as well as the company, the Las Vegas Sands Corporation, which is owned by Sheldon Adelson. How did you feel upon learning about these very, very close ties to a multi-billionaire who is very closely connected to President Trump?
Well, obviously, this case is still under investigation, and the company is being sued in Spain. It's a Spanish company. Obviously, the evidence that's coming out from the investigation is huge, is immense. There's no any doubt that the company was spying on Julian, spying on his visitors, spying on his lawyers, all his meetings, and spying on us. And the evidence aims to show that they were working for the Americans. So we always distrust the company. We knew that they were exceeding the activity, the invasion of privacy. But honestly, we didn't think they will go such extent to work for the enemy, for the ones who were supposed to protect us from. So it was a bit shocking, yes.
If you could say anything to the public about what life was like in the embassy, what would you say?
Well, it was a very, very difficult life because we were surveilled, because we were threatened, because the logistics were very difficult. But despite of that, we treat Julian Assange as family in the first 5 years. He became one of us, he was welcome, he was respectful, and we were in the same fight, protecting him. What happened when the government changed is, for me, difficult to explain, to accept. Then I was not in the embassy anymore.
I am now joined by a senior research fellow with the Global Policy Institute, George Szamuely. George, I want to ask you just a basic question to begin with. How important is it that during especially a time of war and conflict that people have access to truthful information and that investigative journalism is easily acceptable?
Well, it's very hard to think of anything that could be more important because we've had bad experiences, not just in recent years, but for many, many years, of countries recklessly going to war, endangering the lives of their own citizens, endangering the lives of the citizens of other countries, causing untold misery around the world. And the public really doesn't get to know much about these decisions. They're often sold some bill of goods. We're bringing democracy. So-and-so has done these terrible things. He's a war criminal. Or he represses people and so on. So we have to do something about it. And unfortunately, the media have a very poor track record. They have too often just bought into the official stories that the government purvey. And the best example of that is, of course, the Iraq War, in which the media were the cheerleaders of the Bush administration's claim that Saddam Hussein was on the brink of developing weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein was in cahoots with Al-Qaeda, who had attacked the United States on 9/11, and the media bought into it. And that's why the WikiLeaks is such an important organization, because they actually publish real documents, not the insider gossip of all kinds of interested administration officials who have their own agenda trying to screw over their colleagues. This is actual documents. And that's why we absolutely need it, because we need a public that is very aware of what governments are doing on their behalf, and what war crimes are being committed on their behalf, and what destruction is being wrought on the rest of the world on their behalf. And so it's absolutely essential that we have organizations like WikiLeaks.
If the press is meant to be adversarial and to question the authorities in power and the establishment, why haven't they, and does investigative journalism still exist within the mainstream, or did it ever exist?
Well, there is some investigatory journalism, but usually not on the really fundamental questions. There may well be excellent articles in newspapers about what's going on in some nursing home somewhere, some children's homes that was abuses taking place. But on issues of war and peace, the media almost always in lockstep with governments. It's hard to think of any war. There's Vietnam, Iraq, Libya, Yugoslavia. Hard to think of any war in which the media did not support. The government line is, yep, we need to bomb, we need to invade, we need to increase American involvement. And that's what the press is there. I mean, if you think of what the media is most agitated about Trump, is that Trump doesn't want to start any new wars. I mean, this really galls them that why isn't Trump doing this? And then so they come up with all sorts of stories. Well, Trump doesn't really care about the soldiers. He doesn't care about the military. He doesn't care about patriotism. He only cares about making money. But that's nearly always the gravamen of the media charges against Trump, is that he's insufficiently belligerent. Now, to anyone with a kind of who's sane, who thinks, well, Trump is plenty belligerent. I mean, he's conducting wars in Syria, he's in Afghanistan, he's assassinated a leading politician in Iran, General Soleimani. So he's plenty belligerent, but not for the kind of the policy-making elite in Washington. So here we really don't get any kind of a critical perspective on that. So even when you think of Vietnam, because the press was very much against the Vietnam. No, the press was entirely supportive of the Vietnam War until really the very end, but they were entirely supportive of it. And earlier this year, again, during the height of the impeachment craze, what was the main charge against Trump? That he was insufficiently enthusiastic about sending lethal weaponry to Ukraine. He held it up for a couple of months. I mean, can you imagine a worse crime than holding up lethal weaponry to get Ukrainians killing Russians? That's serious. For that, he must be impeached.
Now, wouldn't this be the perfect opportunity for the American mainstream press to really counter Trump by pointing out the fact that it is his administration that is really attacking journalism through the case of Julian Assange?
You would think, and that would be a good example, of when they say, "Yep, here we are now, we are adversarial. We believe in the freedom of expression. We believe in the First Amendment." No, they don't, because first of all, Julian Assange's exposures were highly embarrassing to the war party, and therefore it's highly embarrassing to the mainstream media that has supported wars. But in addition to that, there's the problem of the 2016 election, because much of the mainstream media, which is liberal, still cannot get over the defeat of their beloved Hillary Clinton. That just enrages them, and therefore they see Julian Assange as this critical figure who played this role between Russia and the publication of the emails, that somehow it was Assange who kind of screwed them over. And so that's why the mainstream media hate Julian Assange with at least as much intensity as they hate Donald Trump. And they kind of basically believe one gave us the other.
You're right. Now, going back to the court proceedings, we are now on day 2 of the extradition hearing. What is your perspective of what has happened so far? It seems that the judge has been consistently making rulings in favor of the prosecution, and she seems to be very much controlled by the United States government, which is a huge problem and really shows that the American government does extend its own laws beyond its own borders. And does that concern you?
Well, it does. She seems to me to be a complete hack. She repeatedly rules in favor of the prosecutors who are acting on behalf of the U.S. government, and whatever it is, when they ask for an adjournment, whether they ask for him being transferred from Belmarsh, the sort of horrific conditions that he has to live in Belmarsh, she invariably rules against them. And so, unfortunately, I don't have any hope from her. I mean, if somebody constantly rules against you, you're going to lose this case. I mean, it's just it's just a fact of litigation. If you lose every round, you're going to lose this case. So she's already obviously made up her mind. She clearly detests Assange. yeah, her ruling will go against him. What happens later when it's appealed to the High Court and then maybe to the Supreme Court? I mean, that's a different question. You know, I'm a little pessimistic about that, but you know, some people today said that maybe the High Court will rule favorably in Julian's favor. I hope that's true. You know, but I'm not putting any money on it.
It seems to be that there is definitely a double standard when it comes to the mainstream press and who they care about as far as an individual, specifically a journalist or activist who is being targeted. So, for example, if it is an Iranian journalist or activist or Chinese journalist and activist, the Western governments and media is very quick to point out the flaws in Iran, China, and Russia, but when we see human rights violations and abuses of power in the West, it's almost never discussed in the press.
No, that's exactly right. That is always the case. So you go to the front pages of the mainstream media, and they're up in arms about some journalist who's been imprisoned in Belarus or maybe in Turkey or Iran or in Russia. But boom, this is the most important free press case since for decades. Hardly any coverage at all. I mean, there's almost no coverage at all, other than some silly trivial issue that the Judge Baretza reprimanded Julian Assange in court, and so this gets a little bit of coverage. But the stakes, given the magnitude of the case, gets hardly any coverage. Now imagine that this was in Russia. Imagine if a Russian had published material about war crimes committed by the Russian government. Imagine if he were in detention arbitrarily for years. If he was essentially held in solitary confinement in a maximum security prison, if his conversation with his lawyers was spied upon by the FSB, the Russian secret police. Imagine if his doctor-patient discussions were also spied on by the FSB. How would the New York Times cover it? How would the Guardian cover it? How would the Western media? The Western media would go crazy. They would be, full of it. My God, this is the worst thing. This is, Russia's gone back to the days of Stalin and this horrible repression ever. So we're awfully quick to get very agitated about what others are doing, but we somehow are very indulgent to our own shortcomings.
So I know that you alluded to this earlier, but I was wondering your perspective on the United States election that is going to take place in November. Do you think that Assange's situation could be impacted potentially by the results of the U.S. election?
Well, I think that given that most of the animus towards Julian Assange is coming from the Democrats, although it is the Trump Justice Department that has issued these indictments. Trump, I don't think, has any particular hatred towards Assange. The Democrats do. The Democrats are absolutely convinced that Assange cost them the election, and they really want to screw him over. That's why if Trump loses, I could well envisage him just really trying to, get at the Democrats by pardoning Assange and Edward Snowden, and if he does pardon them, because he knows that would just infuriate them. I mean, I could just see him that's what he would want to do, just to infuriate them, and there's nothing really that they could do about it, because in other cases, the state courts, like the democratically controlled states, they can try to bring their own charges. So, because a president can't issue a pardon for state crimes, they're only for federal crimes. But in this case, it's very hard to see how any state can bring criminal charges against Julian Assange, because you can't see how has any individual state been damaged by the WikiLeaks' exposure. So if Trump does issue a pardon to Assange, that's it. Assange walks. And I could see him well doing that, just out of real cussedness. So he just wants to, screw the Democrats over.
Well, I think that would be the best way to really get back at what he calls the deep state. All right, I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.